Long before European feet touched Pennsylvania soil, ancient forests stretched endlessly across the land. Towering trees with gnarled bark reached skyward while woolly mammoths trudged through the underbrush below. Primitive hunters crouched behind moss-covered rocks, their faces showing surprise at just how difficult mammoth hunting could be. This was Pennsylvania in its primordial glory, untamed, wild, and full of life. As centuries passed, the Lenape people made these forests their home. Their villages hummed with daily activity as women tended bubbling cooking pots over smoky fires. Children chased portly raccoons through the settlement, the masked bandits guilty of stealing corn cakes. In the great council meetings, elderly chiefs sat in perfect circles discussing important matters. Though there was always that one chief who dozed off, his feather headdress tilting comically to one side. The Susquehannock built impressive hilltop fortresses with wooden palisades. Fierce warriors peered over the ramparts, though not all were equally intimidating. One guard's war paint was so smudged he looked more confused than fearsome. These were the people who first called this land home, living in harmony with nature, celebrating with sacred ceremonies where dancers whirled around roaring bonfires and drummers beat out ancient rhythms. Life followed the season. In autumn, hunting parties moved silently through forests of gold and russet. Some hunters so intensely focused on their prey, they didn't notice the turkey was already suspicious of their approach. Winter meant gathering in bark longhouses where grandmothers told stories to wide-eyed children, while snow piled up through smoke holes in the roof. Spring brought planting time, with women working the fields using primitive hoes, occasionally pausing to wipe sweat and accidentally giving themselves dirt mustaches. Summer meant river crossings in birchbark canoes, where overly ambitious paddlers sometimes tried to spear fish while steering, nearly capsizing in the process. Then came the strangers from across the sea. The Swedes arrived first, stumbling off their ships onto muddy shores with confused expressions. Their leader consulted crude maps while pointing in 3 different directions simultaneously. Navigation was clearly not their strong suit. They built Fort Christina, though workplace safety wasn't a priority. Carpenters regularly hammered their thumbs instead of nails, hopping around in pain while their colleagues tried not to laugh. The Dutch soon followed, marching up to Swedish forts with stern authority. The poor Swedish commander, caught in his nightgown with a half-eaten breakfast sausage, had to peer through the gate at his conquerors. The Dutch brought their merchant ways, obsessively counting coins while Native Americans watched with mixed amusement and bewilderment at these strange men in pointed shoes and ruffled collars. But the Dutch rule was short-lived. British soldiers in bright red coats marched in with gleaming bayonets, and the portly Dutch commander reluctantly handed over the keys, muttering under his impressive moustache. The British brought more settlers who built ramshackle cabins with crooked chimneys, struggling with stubborn soil and scrawny chickens. The American dream had a rough start indeed. Fur traders emerged from forests carrying enormous bundles, sometimes with beaver pelts accidentally stuck to their heads like furry hats. Communication between Europeans and Native Americans involved broken languages and elaborate hand gestures, with colonists frequently committing cultural faux pas like pointing with fingers instead of lips. The first winter was brutal. Desperate colonists burned furniture for warmth, while icicles hung from frozen mustaches and eyebrows. When spring finally came, grateful but considerably thinner colonists emerged to find patient Native Americans ready to teach them basic survival skills, like planting corn. Everything changed when William Penn arrived with his holy experiment. King Charles II, resplendent in velvet robes and towering powdered wig, had reluctantly signed over Pennsylvania to pay off royal debts. Penn, in his simple Quaker clothes, accepted with a beatific smile. He stood on his ship's deck with arms outstretched, gazing toward American shores with visionary hope, while fellow Quakers crowded behind him in their plain clothes. Penn's meeting with Chief Tamanend under the great elm tree became legendary. They shared a peace pipe with genuine mutual respect, though some observers remained skeptical of this peaceful approach. Penn threw himself into planning Philadelphia, hunching over drafting tables with such enthusiasm that he once knocked over an inkwell, creating a perfect circle on the map. Sometimes accidents improved the design. The first Quaker meetings were exercises in silence, dozens sitting quietly until someone felt moved to speak, often causing others to jump in surprise. Penn promoted religious tolerance, bringing together Quakers, Mennonites, Lutherans and Catholics to work on common projects, though the forced politeness between groups was sometimes obvious. He presented his frame of government to assembled colonists, explaining democratic principles while at least one listener dozed in the back row. Democracy has been putting people to sleep since it. Penn insisted on fair dealing, personally weighing goods on scales with meticulous attention, much to the frustration of impatient customers. Philadelphia grew rapidly, its streets bustling with merchants and traders, though Quaker women still had to carefully navigate around mud puddles. When Penn returned to England, he waved sadly from his ship's deck, as Philadelphia receded into the distance, leaving behind deputy governors who struggled to maintain order, one pounding his gavel so enthusiastically it flew from his hand and broke a window. Colonial life flourished in Penn's absence. Pennsylvania Dutch farmers created meticulously organized farms with distinctive red barns, their Germanic precision perhaps a bit obsessive. Market days in Lancaster buzzed with activity, as Amish women sold fresh bread and farmers traded goods, leaving English visitors bewildered by rapid German conversation. The Great Awakening brought dramatic preachers who gestured wildly from makeshift pulpits, while colonists reacted with varying degrees of religious fervor. Some wept, others shouted, and skeptics stood with crossed arms. Education meant stern schoolmasters pointing at letters while children recited lessons, though mischievous boys still made faces behind teachers' backs. The infamous walking purchase saw Delaware chiefs watch in alarm as relay runners marked an impossibly long day's walk. Athletic fraud that would make modern scandals look terrible. Frontier defense meant building wooden stockades, though guards had a tendency to nod off at their posts, muskets slipping from relaxed hands. The Paxton Boys, angry Scots-Irish frontiersmen, marched on Philadelphia waving petitions, though some followers looked uncertain about their mission. Colonial craftsmen, blacksmiths, coopers, silversmiths, worked with intense concentration while apprentices watched or at least tried to when not distracted by passing cabs. The Great Wagon Road saw Conestoga wagons rumbling along, until inevitably one got stuck in mud, causing history's first traffic jams. Young Benjamin Franklin tended his printing press in Philadelphia, ink-stained and bespectacled, contemplating clever sayings for Poor Richard's Almanac, the original social media influence. The Pennsylvania Assembly erupted in heated debates with Quakers sitting quietly while other legislators waved their wigs emphatically, the speaker pounding his gavel in futile attempts at order. The French and Indian War brought Pennsylvania militia marching through forests in ill-fitting uniforms while British regulars looked on disdainfully, not realizing the colonials actually knew what they were doing. Young George Washington's Fort Necessity proved poorly named as rain seeped through crude fortifications. Pontiac's rebellion saw native warriors attacking frontier settlements while unprepared colonists fled to safety. Surveyors Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon carefully measured the Pennsylvania-Maryland boundary while locals made bets on the exact line placement. Then came revolution. Angry Philadelphia merchants burned stamps in the streets while British tax collectors fled in terror. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry. Benjamin Franklin, now distinguished with white hair, faced hostile British Parliament members who clearly underestimated the clever Americans. The First Continental Congress saw delegates crowding into Carpenter's Hall, with John Adams scribbling furious notes while Samuel Adams whispered conspiratorially to other radicals. When news of Lexington and Concord arrived via mud-splattered riders, crowds gathered showing mixtures of excitement, fear, and grim determination. The Second Continental Congress buzzed with revolutionary fervor, as John Hancock practiced his signature with elaborate flourish. George Washington accepted command of the Continental Army, looking tall and imposing but slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility. Thomas Paine's common sense passed from hand to hand in taverns, working men nodding approvingly at its plain language, while gentlemen in silk coats looked disturbed by its radical idea. The signing of the Declaration became the stuff of legend. Hancock making his enormous signature while Franklin quipped wittily, though some delegates still looked nervous about committing treason. Town criers read the declaration to cheering crowds as the Liberty Bell rang, while a few loyalists slipped quietly away. Washington's crossing of the Delaware became iconic, though the reality involved seasick soldiers battling ice chunks that threatened to swamp overloaded boats. Valley Forge tested American resolve as exhausted soldiers trudged through snow, many shoeless, leaving bloody footprints. That terrible winter saw soldiers huddling around inadequate fires, some reduced to roasting rats while darning enormous holes in stockings. Baron von Steuben arrived to drill the ragtag Continental Army, bellowing commands in heavily accented English while Americans tried to understand and march properly. By spring, those same soldiers marched out of Valley Forge transformed, still patched but proud, molded from militia into a professional army. The victory was tainted by Benedict Arnold's betrayal, meeting nervously with British Major André to exchange treasonous papers, his face showing the internal struggle between greed and conscience. With independence won, Pennsylvania had to help build a nation. Delegates debated the Constitution passionately as Federalists and Anti-Federalists argued while James Wilson explained benefits to skeptical farmers and artisans. Philadelphia became the nation's capital, with the new federal government convening amid great ceremony, while citizens lined streets with mixed reactions about this democratic experiment. Washington's farewell address warned against political parties and foreign entanglements, advice that would prove prescient. Western Pennsylvania farmers showed their independence during the Whiskey Rebellion, tarring and feathering tax collectors while waving jugs defiantly. The yellow fever epidemic emptied Philadelphia streets as the disease spread, though brave doctors and nurses stayed to tend the sick while others fled. Philadelphia watched glumly as government records headed south to the new capital in Washington. There went the neighborhood, and the profitable government business. But Pennsylvania found new prosperity in manufacturing as textile mills sprang up along rivers, women and children working machines while smoke began darkening previously clear skies. The Lancaster Turnpike brought transportation improvement, though farmers complained about losing land to progress. Families in covered wagons headed west through Pennsylvania toward the Ohio frontier, children peering excitedly toward unknown land. The War of 1812 found Pennsylvania militia drilling awkwardly, some holding muskets backwards while Revolutionary War veterans shook their heads at how quickly military skills had been forgotten. The Industrial Revolution transformed Pennsylvania beyond recognition. Workers dug the Pennsylvania Canal, while engineers in top hats surveyed ambitious projects and skeptical farmers doubted this progress. Railroad fever struck when the first locomotive chugged into Philadelphia, amid great fanfare, crowds cheering while horses reared in terror at the noisy, smoky machine. One gentleman's top hat blew clear off from the steam block. Coal country meant Welsh and Irish miners descending into darkness, faces already blackened by dust, while worried wives waited above knowing the dangers below. The secretive Molly Maguires met in dim taverns planning resistance against mine owners, while company guards patrolled suspiciously outside. The Underground Railroad ran through Pennsylvania as escaped slaves followed the path to freedom, sympathetic Quakers providing shelter while watching nervously for slave catchers. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 saw workers clashing with militia in Pittsburgh, smoke rising from burning rail yards as labor wars intensified. Massive steel mills rose to dominate Pittsburgh's skyline, blast furnaces belching fire and smoke until the sky glowed orange from industrial fires. Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine arrived in shiploads, gaunt faces showing both hope and desperation as they carried meager possessions toward an uncertain future. German families established breweries and skilled trades, creating neat neighborhoods that contrasted sharply with the rougher Irish section. The Know-Nothing movement saw nativists marching with America for Americans banners, while immigrant families watched fearfully from tenement windows. The Civil War brought Lincoln to Philadelphia's Independence Hall, his gaunt face serious as he spoke about preserving the Union. Some listeners cheered while others eyed this prairie lawyer skeptically. Young Pennsylvanians enthusiastically enlisted for what everyone expected would be a short war, families waving flags while secretly fearing the worst. Confederate troops marching through southern Pennsylvania towns sent civilians peering from shuttered windows while the brave hid valuables. The Battle of Gettysburg exploded across wheat fields and rocky hills, smoke and chaos filling the air in the war's pivotal moment. Pickett's charge saw Confederate soldiers advancing across open fields in a doomed assault, courage evident even as Union artillery tore gaps in their ranks. Lincoln's brief but profound Gettysburg Address contrasted sharply with the previous speaker's flowery rhetoric, his simple eloquence capturing the moment's meaning. Pennsylvania factories worked overtime producing weapons and uniforms while women took men's jobs and children collected scrap metal. When veterans returned home, some whole and others bearing visible and invisible wounds, families tried to hide their shock at how war had changed their boys. The Gilded Age saw wealthy industrialists living in magnificent mansions while workers crowded into grimy tenements. The gap between rich and poor had never been more visible. Progressive reformers fought for worker safety and women's suffrage, determined women marching for voting rights while muckraking journalists exposed corporate corruption. The Great Depression brought FDR's New Deal programs, putting Pennsylvanians back to work as CCC workers planted trees and WPA artists created murals celebrating the state's resilience. World War II saw Pennsylvania factories gearing up again, Rosie the Riveters working alongside men while Victory Gardens sprouted in urban neighborhoods. Everyone did their part for the war effort. Today's Pennsylvania balances its industrial heritage with new technology and service. Pittsburgh's skyline gleams with glass and steel while Philadelphia preserves historic Independence Hall. The Keystone State bridges past and future with characteristic Pennsylvania pragmatism, its history a microcosm of the American experience, a story of different peoples learning, sometimes reluctantly, to live together and build something greater than themselves. From ancient forests where mammoths roamed to modern cities reaching toward the sky, Pennsylvania's journey through time reflects the triumphs and tribulations, the noble experiments and embarrassing failures, the conflicts and reconciliations that make us human. It's a story still being written, one compromise, one innovation, one determined step at a time.